seeing the seal shows you that you got some pride to work with, and you go out and represent it and show different people who you are or where you're from.
Talks about it has the plow and the sheaf of wheat, and Creek Nation people were farmers.
But the seal itself is what represents us as what we were back in the Southeast.
It's important to me because my dad was a farmer.
Because everybody in the nation has their own interpretation of what's going on and what means the best to them. And if that's how they take it, then everything that they say is right because it belongs to the people.
My name is Rhonda Beaver, and I'm a Muskogee Creek citizen, and when I see the seal, it's a sense of pride of who we are today, who we were, and who we're going to be in the future.
The Great Seal of the Muskogee Nation, the best-known representative of the Muskogee people. All around the world, this seal on this flag is recognized as a symbol of the fourth largest Native American tribe indigenous to the North American continent. It represents culture, economic impact on local and state and federal levels to the tune of $1 billion annually to the state of Oklahoma alone. It also carries political clout throughout the country. The opinion of the executive branch and the legislative branch of the Muskogee Nation carries great weight on the Congress of the United States, and their favor is to be sought after by any wise politician. All represented by the Great Seal of the Muskogee Nation. But where did the seal come from? Who designed it? What do the colors represent, and why different colors of clouds? Well, we'll try to answer this for you now, and you may be surprised by some of the things we bring out. So sit back and relax, and let's learn together about our seal.
In order to really kind of understand what the Muskogee Nation seal is, you kind of have to understand the historical progression of some of the symbols that are in the seal. So we look back at some of the old laws that were in effect after we removed from our ancestral homelands. And in 1845 and 1857, Christianity was outlawed within the Muskogee Nation Reservation. Even Rollie McIntosh was quoted as saying that the churches are not the religion of the Muskogee people, that the stomp dance is churches and Christianity is the religion of the white people. However, things changed after the Civil War. After the Civil War, Christianity was allowed within the reservation. There was heavily part of the 1866 treaty of the Reconstruction Treaty was actually to allow churches specific areas and repayment of tribal funds in order to set up some of these. I guess missions would be the best way to part of the schooling and all that stuff. But it actually took pretty good hold in some of the most prominent folks within the Creek Nation. Sam Shakoti, Joseph Perryman, and Legis Perryman were all prominent. They were all principal chiefs, and they were all Christians. And that brings us around to kind of like the first time that the Creek Nation seal was known was underneath the administration of Joseph M. Perryman, and it was on a permit for election issued to Arkansas Town, and it featured the plow and the wreath of wheat on it. And at the time, the interpretations were of biblical origin. The wheat is from a passage in Genesis 37:7, and this is during Joseph's dream. To add more context to that, Joseph, if anyone harkens back to their Old Testament Sunday school stuff, it's the story of Joseph and the coat of many colors. So Joseph had a dream that while he was out with his brothers working in the fields, that while they were collecting wheat, that his wheat stood erect, while all of his older brothers' wheat bowed down to it as a sign of respect. And of course, this is what led to Joseph being thrown into a hole and then sold to a caravan. So that's the implications of the wheat. But I'll go ahead and provide the Bible verse, Genesis 37:7. For behold, we were binding sheaves of wheat, and lo, my sheaf arose and also stood upright. Now that's where most of the historical references stop, and just add a ... But I'll go ahead and continue the verse here. It says, and behold, your sheaf stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf. So that's kind of the context. Genesis, obviously the first story of the Bible. The plow, the biblical interpretations for that are found in Amos 9:13. The Bible verse says, behold, the day come, saith the Lord, that the plowman shall overtake the reaper. Again, it stops. What he's talking about there, Amos is one of the first three prophets of the Old Testament. Amos, Hosea, and Isaiah are the first chronicle prophets of the Old Testament. They're out of the Torah. This is the Jewish texts. And so the plow in this term, Amos is actually talking about when Israel was conquered by Babylon and the Israelites were forced into exile. And he's talking about one of these days, the plowman will become the reaper. As in, we're in bondage now, but one of these days we'll be able to reap the benefits of this. And I struggle for kind of some Creek reference there, but I can't find any. Although there is another portion of the verse down below, 9:15, and they shall be no more pulled up from their land which I have gave them, thus said the Lord. So there's some interesting parts in there that could be applicable to Creek culture, but for all intents and purposes, the plow and the wheat, from what we've gathered, are strictly biblical references.
I came into the project of working on a seal back in 2012. I was doing a project that involved the Creek Nation seal as well as our veteran seal. So during the process of that, I got to looking at the artwork for the seal, and I noticed it was a little rough looking, and for what I had to do, not getting into all the technical aspects of what I was going to do, I had to break all the elements into their own separate layer. And so with that, when I was looking at the artwork, I just had an idea. I said, man, it would be nice to really update this seal, and make it a little bit more, just basically clean it up without changing any of the elements, and so in the process of doing that, at the time I got a phone call from Tourism and Recreation, and them asking me if I had a copy of the seal or a really good clean version of the seal that they could use. I think they were going to use it for some of their promotional items within their department.
Good afternoon. My name is Speaker William Lowe. I got my first start here at the Muskogee Creek Nation back in April of 2011. I was the Muskogee Creek Nation Tourism Director then. Back then it was Tourism and Recreation. They were both in the same department. They're separate now, but we all worked over at the Dome. And fast forward to January, we got a new chief. They were inaugurated, and it was Chief Tiger at the time when I was the tourism director. So with that experience I just mentioned, I started looking and noticing that our tribal seal had all kind of different variations to it, because some folks would come over to our group and say, hey, you're technically the marketing guys, so how do we get this printed on our shirts? Hey, black and white would be easier, just, whatever advice we could give them. And we really started trying to, conjure up some consistency with our seal, because how can we create this that it's one version that we all use and it's obviously consistent, but everyone adopts it and we go from there? Because, you would see it, gray clouds, pink clouds, red clouds, any kind of color that folks thought would look good on whatever document, shirt, whatever they were printing or branding, they would use whatever they felt like. I'm a Marine Corps veteran, so I was over at the Veterans Office one day, and Ken Davis, he was the director at the time, he said, hey, Will, Sean's a graphic artist, Sean Tiroli, he's a graphic artist, and we were looking for a vector of this particular seal. How can we find one, create one that would represent and everyone would love to adopt, right? So I visited with Sean, and just so happened, I guess timing is everything, and it was meant to be, so to speak. He said, I have 3 different variations of this seal, and we looked at them, and, the one that we use today is the one that stood out, not only to me, but most of us that were a part of this project, or I guess we call it a project, but we were trying to find something so we could be consistent. And lo and behold, Sean had he had the markup great. We seen a couple of variations, and we settled on that one, and we took it over to the executive branch, which we were under at that time. And
a travel guide that was produced under Tiger administration, they present the same thing, and they quote Muriel Wright as their source. And of course, we've gone through all that, and Muriel Wright is involved in this process a little bit later. Okay, so the Curtis Act was passed in 1898, and it effectively abolished the court systems. And during that time, a lot of our records and stuff were taken and confiscated by the state of Oklahoma. But we're in that process of trying to establish the state of Sequoyah. So that's when Alfalfa Bill Murray, Creek Delegation, Cherokee all came together and thought that we could form an Indian state and enter the Union that way. Of course, history tells us that didn't work out. But the majority of the Oklahoma Constitution is based off of the state of Sequoyah's Constitution. The seal of Oklahoma is very much lifted from the seal of the state of Sequoyah. We have 2 images, and in both of these, they're dated to 1905 and 1907, represent Creek Nation with a plow and a wreath of wheat.
Shall be the seal as illustrated.
Yeah.
And this is in black and white.
Ooh, so we don't even have color.
At this time, it needs to be mentioned that the seal was not copyrighted property of the Muskogee Nation, and other organizations did use something similar. Here you see it was used by the Oklahoma Agricultural and Mechanical College, here in Okmulgee, as their own collegiate seal.
We had an event here at one time, and I was walking around through the museum with, at the time, Speaker Yahola. And we got to the Honor Guard banner. And we was looking at the banner, and he pointed out the Creek seal to me, and he said, we never approved that. And I was like, okay. I was unaware that, that it was approved or not approved through council. It was my understanding that everything goes through council regarding the seal. And so, I did not know that. And he pointed it out to me, and I was just like, okay. And that's just kind of where we left off on that conversation with that. So it was an interesting situation. It's just as a graphic designer, I was given a project, and to update and modernize the seal. I did that, and I turned it over. And once I heard it was approved, like I said, I was unaware that it was and wasn't approved. But that's the one we've been using for about the last 8 or 9 years. So it's just one of those interesting situations, somewhat awkward a little bit, because, I was just like, oh, okay.
And I guess Chief Tiger, he thought it was a great idea to adopt this particular seal. So, from there, we got the permission from the chief. I remember, talking to the council at one time, and I'm not sure from that point if it ever went to the council to be approved or not. But today, as the Speaker of the National Council, I see that whenever we have legislation concerning the seal, for instance, we had a piece of legislation January of this year concerning our tags and marketing. And in our Constitution, the rendition of the seal that we use today is in there. So it was adopted somehow, some way, put into our Constitution and laws. But that's really, going back in 2011, 2012, that's how what we see today, the blue clouds, the brighter green version of our seal, that's really how it all got started back then.
I'm not too familiar on if the history of the colors of the seal. I wasn't aware that there is a reason why they used any particular colors. If there was brown clouds, why they were brown. Like I said, when I always saw the seal, I saw the clouds always in different colors. It just no matter it just depended on where I went. Like I said, I saw pink clouds, I saw brown clouds, I saw gray clouds, I saw blue clouds. So, and that was one of the things I thought about. I was just like, okay, what are the true colors? And if there are true colors, is there a meaning behind the colors?
So Alabama, again, was trying to get these seals together in order to form flags because they wanted to fly the flags in honor of the tribes that used to live in their state. In 1906, we have the Allotment Act. We have no more elected chiefs. We enter an era of appointed chiefs. This is where if the government wanted something done and they needed it to be done, they would appoint a chief. Sometimes these would be chiefs for a day, sign some paperwork for the U.S. government so they could abide by their law, and then they'd go about their business. This was a systematic destruction of the sovereignty of the tribe. Once Alabama contacted OHS and they formed their Indian Commission, they reached out to an architect, Guy C. Reed, who's actually, his house is on the National Register of Historic Places in Oklahoma City. And he's the artist who actually drew the seal, and then what he did was in order to take it around to the commission, he did larger paintings of the seal, and that was at the kind of the unveiling of these the seals, which would eventually go onto flags for Alabama. And so there's more information about Guy C. Reed available about a lot of different architectural works. He was pretty much responsible for a lot of the higher education buildings. But he was a pretty well-renowned artist and architect, and so he was the one that actually drew the images that would of the Great Seal for the Alabama flags. And then I believe underneath a recent administration, the clouds changed color as well, and so that there's been a couple of different iterations, but they all harken back to Alabama. And then further back to the seal used by Joseph M. Perryman in 1885.
As we're updating the seal, do we attach any meaning to anything, or is it just pretty literal? It's just like clouds are blue, clouds are white, sometimes gray or whatever. So, I presented those color options as an option, to say, hey, what do you think of these colors? And from a graphic design standpoint, my goal was just to, make it more legible, more clear. Like I said, with the old seal, if you really reduce that down to a very small size, the way the original seal was, a lot of those colors would get lost and it would get what we call muddy, and it would be just, none of the elements would stick out, they wouldn't be clear. So, that was also one of my goals as designing the seal, was to make everything as legible as possible, no matter what size you make it. Whether it's the size of a dime or the size, that you could put on the side of a building. It's all going to be consistent. It's all going to have the same clarity to it. So, that was a lot of the technical aspects of that as well, is what went into, picking out any particular colors. I gave them the options, and that's what they chose.
Mm-hmm. The flag of the Muskogee Creek Nation shall include the Great Seal of the nation set upon the white background of the flag. As graphically depicted in the Constitution, the seal illustrates a sheaf of wheat, blah, blah, blah. But it doesn't say anything about colors.
And I think it's important to note that, Creek in parentheses has actually never appeared on the Muskogee Nation seal. The flag of the Muskogee Creek Nation shall include the Great Seal of the nation set upon a white background of the flag. As graphically depicted in the Constitution, the seal illustrates the sheath of wheat and the plow in the center of the device surrounded by the words Great Seal of the Muskogee Nation Indian Territory. So there's a couple of things to point out here. First, this indicates that the seal was already established and in use by the time that this law was passed. And secondly, it is very clearly referencing Muskogee Nation. To be honest, one of the references that we can find is a 1995 law discussing the passage or the official flag and Great Seal. But it's more of an adoption of the existing seal than
So it is obvious that the Muskogee Nation has come a long way, and apparently the seal, in some form, has been with them for a lot of that journey. The new vector of colors is now established, and it has been adopted by the entire nation, though you will still see a red cloud or a brown cloud every now and then. It was trademarked in the year 2000 and now solely belongs to the Muskogee Nation. And though it may never have been officially ratified by the Muskogee Nation National Council, it is being used by the National Council on all the official documents, contracts, and treaties. So it belongs to the Muskogee Nation. It represents the Muskogee people. It always has, from the first time it was used in 1885 till now, and it will 1,000 years from now. The Great Seal of the Muskogee Nation. Long may she wave. Mado.